Thank you so much. And I echo the sentiments of David that it is really a pleasure to be here. So the committee was formed earlier this year. And there has been much ado, much debate about many things, the composition of the committee, its work, whether or not it's shrouded in secrecy, whether or not we're engaging in nefarious activities, whether or not the ministers are going to be out, so whether or not the committee is properly constituted, most of us being lawyers, etc. So we have come a long way since March, and my task this afternoon is to just give you a brief overview of what the work has been. So the process is basically dubbed many things: the Jamaicanization of the Constitution, the reformation of the Constitution, etc., making the people sovereign. All these terms are being utilized within the context of the committee, as well as the context of the population in terms of what's going on and what does this mean. David mentioned what we call the man in the street. In other words, what's in there for him. A lady asked us this week, is it going to affect her UK pension? You know, people ask, is it going to affect trade? Am I going to need a visa where I don't need a visa? Am I going to not have a visa, etc.? So let us start with the nucleus of the discussion. So we are a sovereign nation. We are celebrating independence. Today is Emancipation Day. And at Emancipation, we know what happened, and at independence, we also know what happened. We never, ever enjoyed independence as a people. So I think one of the views of not just this government, but the previous governments in terms of even the constitutional reform committees that were engaged before, is really just to look at where do we see our own constitution. And David did mention the hierarchy of where our constitution really is one of the lowest forms of the legislative hierarchy. It's an ordering council, it's attached to something. So then we also use terms such as repatriating the constitution, meaning bringing it back here so that it can be passed by the Parliament of Jamaica, passed by the people of Jamaica. So again, let's speak to the nucleus of this. So we have a king of Jamaica, and many people don't consider King Charles to be the king of Jamaica. And he is the king of Jamaica. And I want to, this is just maybe a little comic relief. We were at a public consultation, and a lady took the podium, she took the microphone, and she said, you know, there are so many other things to do in this country. She said, look how many poor people are here. They want to, we should focus on other things rather than this. And then when she learned that King Charles was really the king of Jamaica in terms of head of state, you know, she came back and she said, but what if he dies and the wife has any role to play? Then she says, okay, we should really go for the king. So in other words, but people do have different views about this process. So to dispense with King Charles III, King of Jamaica, the Constitution, of course, prescribes the methodology. So there's no way around that. And the Constitution prescribes how it works. In other words, you must have the consultation, there must be a bill, it must go to the public, it must go to the two houses in Parliament, and eventually it must go to the people. So nothing can happen unless it goes to the people. There must be a referendum. And so people must go to the polls, people have to be enumerated, and people have to vote whether or not they want to keep King Charles, King of Jamaica, or whether or not we want to move on. No. Even in moving on, people are asking, okay then, so what? What happens after that? What next after we do that? And so the minister did announce a series of activities. In other words, the process is three-phased. And the first phase has to do with the more difficult parts of the Constitution that need reformation. And one of them, of course, if we want to go republic, then it means that we have to dispense with King Charles being King of Jamaica as the first step. So the discussions in the council, in the committee, have to do with, so what is now going to be the role of this new president? And what is going to be the role of the Prime Minister? We have been having consultations, submissions are being made to the council, and people have a variety of views. Some persons ask, why do you need both? Why do you need a president and a prime minister? Some people say they want an executive president like the United States of America. Some people have made recommendations that are far left. Sometimes, so therefore our response would be ensure, at least personally for me, my view is whatever formulation we decide on, it must transcend generations and it must work regardless of who assumes the position. Because we are not creating a mechanism, we're not creating a governance framework or legislative framework that is pliable. It has to be secured for future generations. In fact, the issue of intergenerational equity in terms of generations to come, we are really the trustees here trying to have these discussions. And there are discussions about whether or not young people are interested, what is in it for them, they're on their happy way. It forms part of the whole reparatory justice movement as well as part of our own internal reparatory justice initiatives, because we now need to have our own constitution. We have been discussing the issue of the education of our people, and as David said, who knows anything about the Constitution? Even on the committee, most of us are lawyers, we're learning ourselves, because we really are not constitutional experts, so to speak. So we have our experts, of course, on the committee. We have, for example, Dr. Lord Barnett, etc. And we have, the committee, I think, is well represented, and I also think that, and I'm going to say this, I ask myself the question sometimes, who knows people's business and problems more than lawyers and pastors? I'll just leave it at that. In terms of the public education program, right, in terms of the public education program, we are going island-wide, we are going parish by parish, we are doing parish meetings, and we are also meeting with specific groups. For example, we meet with the Justice of the Peace, we meet with community groups, people have questions to ask, people want to know, so what of the JP, what's going to become of the JP? If you get rid of the king, what's going to happen to the custos, what's going to happen to all these other bodies? And of course the answer is, justice of the peace are necessary for the effective function of the country. So whatever it is that we're going to call them, they will remain. In terms of the value system, David also mentioned the value systems, and I think that this is a process by which we should determine what is it that we want Jamaica to look like. What do we want to see for ourselves? So we can always say, let's do it like the US. We need to ask ourselves, are we politically mature enough to do certain things? You know, what are the driving forces? Should we stand back and say, okay, there are all these examples from various jurisdictions, but what is it that we want for Jamaica? We have also said in the committee that some of the elements of the Constitution have served us well, have served this democratic process well. People say throw it out. One man said, basically just burn it. We said, no, you can't burn it because the provisions in the Constitution say you can't burn it. You can't get rid of it because there's a prescription as to how you effect the various changes. These are some of the issues. One of the other issues that we have been discussing is the role of the Member of Parliament. There are Jamaicans who believe that the Member of Parliament should not have a ministerial role because you voted him in to take care of the constituency, and that should be his role. And therefore, the MP should keep the MP role, and then you should have ministers. People have made recommendations. They say when they go to the polls, they want to see the ministers there. They want to know who they are voting for. They want to vote for the Prime Minister separate from the MP. People say when you go behind that ballot box, what you need to see on it is the MP for the constituency, and then you must know who the Prime Minister is going to be so that you have a vote. So that if there are two options, that's what you have. So people have very various ways of determining how is it that we domesticate the Constitution, but also how is it that we ensure that people are sovereign. And in a sense, what does that mean? A gentleman asks, okay, all these lands are vested in the crown now. Are they going to be now vested in the people? And then I ask, and if we vest in the people, does that mean you can build a house on it tomorrow morning? So these are questions that we have to ask ourselves because people want rights. There are other rights that are not necessarily in my view, for the Constitution, and perhaps for other legislation to be amended, etc. So the land issue is one, beach is one. There are groups in this country, for example, like our indigenous groups, and some people don't believe that we have true indigenous peoples. That's a discussion that's ongoing. But people are saying, I want to be recognized in the Constitution. We had previous discussions even outside of the Constitutional Reform Committee where some groups are saying, I want when you take up the census that I'm identified. So the census should say, I'm a Maroon, I'm a Taino. So all these rights are coming in. When the Constitutional Committees that met prior, some rights I would say were perhaps latent. Today they are no longer latent rights. They are rights that are on the table. What are we going to do? Are we going to open the book and say, okay, let all ideas contain and all rights will be recognized in various ways? What do we really want in terms of our own constitutional reform process based on what it is that we want to see within our own country? The issue of Commonwealth citizens, for example, the committee had met, and basically I think, David, I think we can say we had, within the committee itself, that we had reached some consensus in saying Commonwealth citizens should be considered foreigners. Because right now, Commonwealth citizens can participate in the electoral process. But many of our people are not necessarily Commonwealth citizens, let's say the US citizens. And we have seen those stories in the media, we have seen them play out in Parliament, etc. So is it that we should continue to retain the notion that Commonwealth citizens have a role to play in our democratic processes? And if you live abroad and you want to come back and serve, what are the prescriptions that you should adhere to? Should you, for example, be required to live in the country for a period of years prior? Persons have said, or should you have to renounce your citizenship? Which is what we do now. So there are various matters to be discussed as we go forward, even as we think of dispensing with King Charles. Some of the other areas as well also speak to, and this is my take on it too. Should the Constitution, for example, address state responsibilities? Some constitutions have provisions for state responsibilities. Some constitutions have responsibilities for citizen responsibilities. Are we going to consider those matters as part of what we want for ourselves? We just amended the Bill of Rights a couple of years ago. Do we want to review them? Are there new rights emerging that we want to include in them? So these are the areas. So the issue relating to the trajectory in terms of the time frame is a very important one. And I know the minister in her sectoral speech actually requested or urged both political parties to commit to the completion of the process. Because you can't go and say, okay, we are going republic. So we now have the Republic of Jamaica. And we now have a new president, whatever formulation that may be. I think most of the recommendations now are that the president should be non-executive, a non-executive president, even though some persons want an executive president. My view is that we should sit down and articulate the roles before determining what banner you put it under. So rather than just saying executive, non-executive, what is it that we want this president to do? What is it that this prime minister should do? People talk about fixed term elections. So the other question we should ask ourselves, if we have fixed term elections and at the end of the fixed term, you don't have a viable alternative, what do? Do you just put in the other party? Because there's a fixed term election. So some of the questions go to, as I said, our maturity as a people, where is it that we want to go? And I'm not suggesting that we need to be static now in 2023. The issue for me is we need to determine, as I've said, what is it that we want this country to look like? What are the rights and responsibilities of citizens and state alike? And how is it that we are going to ensure that those rights are enshrined, and what are those rights? I am in the culture sector. There are discussions for obeah to be legalized. That is freedom of religion. The Constitution already grants you that. So in other words, we were in a session on this week in Westmoreland, and the gentleman asked, what are we talking about the church? In other words, do you now review the national anthem, which is a prayer? How many things do we review? There are many symbols that we'll have to get rid of. In the criminal law, what are we going to do? Is it the state? Are the offenses against the state? Are the offenses against the people? You know, so there are many other issues. I looked at the officer the other day in his was an inspector, and you look at his buttons, they all have the crown somewhere.
Right.
So clearly you have to get rid of the uniform. So it's also, in other words, it's an expensive process as well, and people are also calling, I'm putting another term, almost like a cost-benefit analysis. What will it cost the country? What is the benefit to me as a citizen of this country? So there are many issues being discussed. I'm going to end now. The committee is inviting submissions, so you send the submissions into the ministry. You're invited to come to the committee. Those submissions are also streamed as well, so that the rest of the diaspora can listen and make their comments in terms of what the work is that we are doing. I must say, however, and I think David raised it, in terms of the public consultation process, is that when you go into a town, you really don't get a room with 150 people. And so the question is it that people are not interested? Or is it that there must be another methodology? Many times we go out, we are discussing matters that people have no clue about, because the Constitution is not something that is taught in schools. People don't know their rights, etc. So I think as those of us who have a better or a greater understanding of what the process is, or what the processes are, I think we have a greater responsibility and accountability to those who don't. Back in the day when the commissions were meeting, many Jamaicans couldn't read. Today, many of us can read, but we don't read. And we really don't. So what we do is we depend on the third-party interventions, we depend on the media, we depend on the social media persons, and they have a role to play. They do have a role to play, but we don't read. And those of us who can and who understand the system, as I said, I believe we have a greater responsibility and accountability. This is an accountable process. If we want to put in a political directorate, governance and legislative framework, the accountability must come two ways. I want to end with this. My youngest son said to me the other day driving, he said, "Mommy, we are not accustomed to rules. This country is not run according to rules." That's what he said. But if it is that we are asking those who govern us to be accountable to us, then the accountability must also go the other way. Thank you very much.